The spotlight blinded me. It sliced through the darkness of the grand ballroom at the Palmer House Hilton to illuminate the thief standing 5 feet away from me. I stopped breathing. My hands gripped the edge of the velvet tablecloth until my knuckles turned white. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. He declared the winner of the Chicago Horizon Design Competition with a tone of reverence. He announced the name Jessica Sterling. The room exploded. 300 of Chicago's wealthiest real estate moguls and architects rose to their feet. They cheered for a lie. They clapped for a crime. I sat frozen in my chair. Jessica stood up. She smoothed the silk of her $5,000 red dress and feigned a look of total surprise. She covered her mouth with manicured hands. She hugged her father, Robert Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Vance Architecture. He beamed with pride. He looked at his daughter as if she were a prodigy. He did not look at me, to him. I was just Mia Harper. I was the unpaid intern who fetched the coffee. I was the invisible ghost who worked 18 hours a day in the basement archives. Jessica walked up the stairs to the stage. Every step she took felt like a heel digging into my throat. On the giant screen behind her, the rendering appeared. It was magnificent. A 60-story skyscraper designed to spiral like a strand of DNA, covered in solar-responsive glass. The project was titled The Obsidian Spire. My heart hammered against my ribs. That was my design. Those were my calculations. That was the project I had spent the last 6 months building on my laptop between midnight and 4 in the morning. I looked at the table next to me. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank. It alerted me that my checking account was overdrawn by $12. I looked back at the stage. The announcer handed Jessica a giant check. It was written out for $100,000. Jessica leaned into the microphone. She wiped a fake tear from her cheek. She thanked her father for his guidance. She claimed that this design came to her in a dream. She told the crowd that true genius required sacrifice. The irony tasted like bile in my mouth. However, nobody in that room knew the truth. They saw a brilliant young architect. I saw a predator. Jessica had not just stolen my file. She had stolen my future. She had stolen the only way I could save my mother's house from foreclosure. My vision blurred. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run up to that stage and tear the check from her hands. But I stayed seated. A waiter refilled my water glass. He did not notice the tears sliding down my face. He did not notice that the girl in the cheap polyester suit was shaking with a rage that could burn this hotel to the ground. Then, Robert Sterling took the microphone. He announced that the Obsidian Spire would break ground in 3 months. He declared it the legacy of the Sterling family. I closed my eyes. I took a deep, shuddering breath. They thought they had won. They thought I was just a powerless intern who would go home and cry. They thought I would fade away into poverty while they built my dream and put their name on it. They were wrong. I opened my eyes. I stared directly at the giant screen displaying my stolen work. I focused on the intricate lattice structure of the building's base. Jessica did not know. Her father did not know. The judges did not know. I had built a failsafe. Deep inside the digital architecture of that file, hidden beneath layers of rendering data, I had buried a secret. It was a digital time bomb. It was a structural flaw that only I could see. And it was programmed to reveal itself in the most spectacular, humiliating way possible. I reached for my glass of wine. I took a slow sip. Let her have the applause tonight. Let her hold that check. Because tomorrow morning, I was going to turn that award-winning design into the greatest scandal in the history of Chicago architecture. The nightmare was not ending. It was just beginning. And I held the trigger. To understand why I did not scream at the gala, you must understand the silence of the basement. For the last 18 months, my life had been confined to the lower archives of the Sterling Vance headquarters on Wacker Drive. It was a windowless concrete box buried 20 feet beneath the Chicago River. It smelled of stale coffee and decaying blueprints. I was the junior associate. That was the official title on my badge. However, in reality, I was the invisible engine that kept Jessica Sterling's career running. Jessica was 24 years old. She was the only daughter of Robert Sterling. She had graduated from a prestigious design school in Parsons. But she could not calculate a load-bearing wall if her life depended on it. She treated architecture like a fashion accessory. She spent her mornings shopping on the Magnificent Mile and her afternoons terrorizing the interns. She called me her assistant. I called myself her hostage. Every major project Jessica submitted in the last year had my fingerprints all over it. I corrected her structural errors. I adjusted her lighting simulations. I rewrote her project proposals to sound literate. She took the credit. I took the minimum wage paycheck. I tolerated the abuse for one simple reason. I needed the Sterling name on my resume to get my license. In the cutthroat world of Chicago architecture, Robert Sterling was a kingmaker. If I quit, he would blacklist me. I would never design a doghouse in this city, let alone a skyscraper. But the obsidian spire was different. This competition was not for the firm. It was an open call from the city of Chicago. It was anonymous. It was my only ticket out of the basement. I remembered the night I finished the rendering. It was 3 weeks ago. I sat in my small apartment in Pilsen. The radiator rattled against the winter wind. My laptop hummed with heat as it processed the final image. The building was beautiful. It was a twisting tower of black glass and recycled steel that looked like smoke rising from the earth. I had poured my soul into every pixel. I had designed it to capture rainwater and generate wind energy. It was my love letter to the city that raised me. I also remembered the reason I worked so hard. On my kitchen table, buried under sketches, sat a letter from the Cook County Sheriff's Office. It was a final notice of foreclosure. My mother had Parkinson's disease. The medical bills had drained my father's life insurance policy 2 years ago. We were 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank wanted $75,000 by the end of the month, or they would take the house. That prize money was not just a bonus. It was survival. It was the roof over my sick mother's head. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. I was in the archives organizing zoning permits. The elevator dinged. Jessica walked in. She did not sneer at me like usual. She smiled. It was a predatory smile that showed too many teeth. She held 2 cups of expensive latte. She placed one on my desk. She told me that her father was looking for fresh ideas for the firm's portfolio. She claimed he wanted to promote someone from within. She asked if I was working on anything special. I was exhausted. I was desperate for recognition. I made the mistake of trusting her. I opened my laptop. I showed her the obsidian spire. Jessica stared at the screen for a long time. Her eyes widened. She did not compliment the design. She did not ask about the engineering. She simply asked if I had submitted it to the competition yet. I told her I was submitting it on Friday. She nodded slowly. She told me that the file was too large to email. She suggested I put it on a flash drive so she could show her father upstairs immediately. She promised me that this could be my big break. My heart soared. I thought this was it. I thought my hard work was finally being seen. I handed her the silver flash drive. She took it. Her fingers were cold. She told me to get back to work on the filing. Then she walked to the elevator and ascended to the penthouse office. I waited for a summons. I waited for Robert Sterling to call me up and shake my hand. The call never came. Instead, the next day, I was locked out of the company's server. My access card stopped working for the upper floors. When I asked Jessica about the flash drive, she looked at me with blank eyes. She told me she had lost it. She claimed the file was corrupted anyway. She laughed and told me to focus on my real job. I panicked. I rushed home to check my backups. My laptop was gone. My apartment had been broken into while I was at work. The police called it a random burglary. They took a report and left. But I knew better. The thief had taken my laptop and my external hard drives. They left my jewelry. They left my cash. They only took the data. I had no proof. I had no backups. I had nothing but the memory of the code I wrote. I tried to confront Jessica the next morning. She threatened to call security. She told me I was acting hysterical. She reminded me that I was an at-will employee with a sick mother and zero savings. So I went back to the basement. I swallowed my rage. But Jessica made a critical error. She underestimated the girl in the basement. She did not know that I had a habit of working directly on the cloud server when the internet at home was slow. She did not know that the flash drive I gave her contained the final render, but it also contained a link to a shared workspace she could not see. I watched the live stream of the submission deadline from my phone in the archives. I saw the entry appear under the name Jessica Sterling. She had not changed a single line. She was too lazy to even rename the layers in the CAD file. That was when I stopped crying. That was when I started planning. I knew I could not sue her. Her father had an army of lawyers who would bury me in court for years. I needed something faster. I needed something that would destroy her credibility instantly and permanently. I had 72 hours before the gala. I spent those 3 days awake. I used a backdoor administrative password I had discovered 6 months ago while fixing the IT guy's coffee machine. I accessed the submission file remotely. I did not delete the project. That would be too simple. Instead, I began to write a new script into the presentation software. I embedded it deep within the lighting simulation code. It was a dormant virus. It was designed to trigger only when the file was projected onto a screen larger than 50 inches, like the massive LED wall at the Palmer House Hilton. I sat there in the dark. I typed line after line of code. My mother called me from her bed upstairs. She asked if I was okay. I told her everything was going to be fine. I promised her we would keep the house. I looked at the screen. The code was finished. I titled the script The Trojan Horse. Now, sitting in the ballroom, watching Jessica bask in the applause for my work, I felt a cold calm settle over me. The presentation was about to begin. The announcer asked everyone to dim the lights. He asked the audience to turn their attention to the main screen for a 3D walkthrough of the winning design. Jessica smiled and signaled the technician to press play. I took a deep breath. I checked my watch. It was showtime. The ballroom plunged into darkness. The only light came from the massive LED wall that stretched 20 feet across the stage. Classical music swelled from the surround sound speakers. The video began to play. It was the walkthrough animation of the Obsidian Spire. The camera panned over a digital rendering of the Chicago skyline. It swooped down from the clouds to reveal the tower. The building twisted upward like a shard of black crystal piercing the sky. It was breathtaking. The audience gasped in unison. I watched my own creation from table 42. My heart beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Seeing it on this scale was overwhelming. Every beam, every pane of glass, every shadow was exactly how I had imagined it in my small, drafty apartment. Jessica stood by the podium. She held a laser pointer. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom. She began to narrate the tour. Her voice was smooth and practiced. She used words like organic synergy and structural harmony. She sounded like a visionary. However, I knew the script she was reading. I had written it for her 3 days ago for a different project. She had simply recycled my words to sell my stolen design. She pointed the laser at the base of the tower. She explained that the lobby was inspired by the flow of the Chicago River. The crowd murmured their approval. Robert Sterling nodded from the front row. He looked ready to burst with pride. He whispered something to the deputy mayor sitting next to him. I checked the time on my phone. It was 8:45. The virus was programmed to execute at 8:46. 60 seconds remained. I took a slow breath. The air in the room felt heavy and hot. I gripped the stem of my wineglass. This was the point of no return. Once the code triggered, my career at Sterling Vance would be over. My reputation would be incinerated. If this failed, I would be the crazy intern who sabotaged a company presentation. I would face lawsuits. I would lose the house. But if it worked, justice would be swift. 30 seconds. Jessica moved to the slide about sustainability. She bragged about the solar responsive skin of the building. She claimed she had spent months calculating the sun angles. I clenched my jaw. Jessica did not know how to calculate a sun angle. She thought north was whichever way the elevator opened. 10 seconds. The animation on the screen began to zoom in on the penthouse level. The music reached a crescendo. 3, 2, 1. The screen flickered. It was subtle at first, a momentary stutter in the frame rate. A jagged line of static cut horizontally across the beautiful rendering of the tower. Jessica paused. She tapped the clicker in her hand. She frowned slightly. The audience shifted in their seats. A few people cleared their throats. Then it happened again. This time, the glitch was violent. The entire image distorted, the colors inverted from cool blues and blacks to angry, neon reds. The audio screeched. It sounded like a car crash mixed with a dial-up modem. Hands covered ears across the ballroom. Jessica looked towards the technical booth at the back of the room. She motioned frantically for them to fix it. I did not look back. I kept my eyes glued to the stage. The screeching stopped abruptly. The screen went black. Complete silence filled the room. Jessica laughed nervously into the microphone. She apologized for the technical difficulties. She joked that the technology could not handle the brilliance of the design. Nobody laughed. Suddenly, the screen roared back to life, but the beautiful rendering was gone. In its place was the wireframe view of the building. This was the skeletal structure underneath the skin. It was the raw engineering data. And it was moving. The digital building began to disassemble itself. The steel beams flew apart. The glass panels shattered into digital dust. It looked like the tower was being stripped naked piece by piece. Robert Sterling stood up in the front row. He shouted at the technicians to cut the power. The technicians were frantically typing on their consoles, but nothing happened. My code had locked them out. It had seized control of the projection system and the audio feed. Jessica backed away from the screen. She looked terrified. The red light from the LED wall cast a demonic glow on her pale face. Text began to scroll across the screen. It was not the promotional text Jessica had prepared. It was the metadata of the file. Huge, blocky white letters marched across the red background. File created October 12th. Author Mia Harper. File modified October 15th. Author Mia Harper. File accessed November 01. User Jessica Sterling. A gasp rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Jessica stared at the screen. Her mouth hung open. She shook her head in denial. She screamed that it was a mistake. She yelled that she had been hacked. But the screen was not done. The wireframe model dissolved. A video window popped up in the center of the massive display. The quality was grainy. It was black and white security footage. I leaned forward in my chair. A cold smile touched my lips. I had not just embedded the file metadata. I had hacked the security camera in the Sterling Vance elevator 2 weeks ago. I had been saving this clip for a rainy day. The video showed Jessica standing in the elevator. The timestamp was clearly visible. It was the morning she stole my flash drive. In the video, Jessica held the silver drive up to the light. She kissed it. Then she pulled out her phone. The audio from the elevator camera boomed through the ballroom speakers. Jessica's voice rang out, clear and arrogant. In the video, she dialed a number. She spoke to her friend. She laughed. She said that the little intern was so stupid. She bragged that she just got $1 million design for the price of a latte. She said her father would never know the difference because he never checked the details anyway. The real Jessica, standing on the stage, turned white as a sheet. She dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud. Robert Sterling froze. He looked from the screen to his daughter. The look on his face was not anger, it was horror. The 300 guests in the room turned their heads. 600 eyes shifted from the incriminating screen to the woman in the red dress. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging in the air, waiting to drop. I slowly stood up from table 42. My legs were shaking, but my head was high. I smoothed my cheap polyester skirt. I picked up my purse. The rising action was over. The bomb had detonated. Now, it was time for the fallout. The ballroom was a cauldron of noise. Reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning storms. I walked toward the stage. The crowd parted for me. Men in tuxedos and women in couture gowns stepped back as if I were radioactive. They whispered my name. They pointed at the girl in the polyester suit who had just turned their gala into a crime scene. I reached the stairs. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I ascended the steps one by one. The metal heels of my shoes clicked against the wood. It was the sound of judgment approaching. Jessica stood frozen near the podium. Her face was a mask of ruined mascara and terror. She looked at me with pleading eyes. She silently begged me to stop. I walked past her without a glance. She was no longer my boss. She was just a ghost in a red dress. I walked straight to Robert Sterling. The CEO of Sterling Vance was sweating. Beads of perspiration rolled down his forehead. He looked at the chaos in the room. Then he looked at me. His eyes darted around, calculating the damage. He was a survivor. He was already trying to spin the narrative. Robert grabbed the microphone from the floor. He forced a wide, desperate smile. He shouted over the noise. He announced that this was all part of the show. He claimed that Mia Harper was his brilliant protégé. He lied to the room that they had planned this dramatic reveal together to demonstrate the power of young talent. He extended a hand toward me. It was a lifeline. He was offering me a way out. If I played along, he would make me a partner. If I lied for him, he would make me rich. I looked at his hand. It was manicured and shaking. I took the microphone from him. I did not shake his hand. The room went quiet again. They wanted to hear the intern speak. I looked at the 300 guests. I looked at the judges. Then I turned to Jessica. I spoke into the microphone. My voice echoed through the massive hall. I declared that the design on the screen was indeed mine. I confirmed that Jessica had stolen it from my desk 3 days ago. Robert stepped closer. He hissed a warning in my ear. He threatened to sue me for defamation. He promised to bury me in legal fees until I starved. I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. I told Robert that he should check his email. He frowned. He pulled his phone from his pocket. I addressed the audience while he read. I explained the true nature of the Trojan horse. I revealed that the file Jessica stole was not just a copy. It was a decoy. It was a poisoned chalice. I explained that while the building looked beautiful on the outside, I had intentionally sabotaged the internal engineering data in the stolen file. I had removed the wind load bracing calculations from the 45th floor. Gasps of horror rose from the architects in the room. They understood the implication immediately. I turned to Jessica. I asked her a simple engineering question. I asked her what the shear stress coefficient of the spire was. She stammered. She blinked. She looked at her father for help. She did not know the answer. I delivered the verdict. I told the crowd that if Sterling Vance built the tower using my stolen plans, the building would collapse in the first winter storm. It would have killed thousands of people. I pointed at Jessica. I accused her of criminal negligence. I stated that by stealing the design without understanding the math, she had proven she was not just a thief, she was a danger to public safety. Robert looked up from his phone. His face was gray. The blood had drained entirely from his skin. He had just opened the email I sent him 2 minutes ago. This was the twist. This was the knife in the wound. I did not just expose them. I had replaced them. I announced to the stunned room that the real, structurally sound blueprints for the obsidian spire were not lost. They were safe. I revealed that at 8 o'clock this morning, I had sold the exclusive rights to the corrected design. I had not sold them to a developer. I had not sold them to the city. I pointed to the back of the room. A man stood up. He was tall, silver-haired, and smiling. It was Marcus Vanguard. He was the CEO of Vanguard Architecture, the bitter rival of Sterling Vance. I announced that the Obsidian Spire would be built, but it would be built by Vanguard, and I would be the lead architect on the project. The twist landed like a physical blow. Robert Sterling dropped his phone. The screen shattered on the stage floor. He realized the trap. He had spent the last hour praising a building that now belonged to his enemy. He had spent a fortune promoting a project that would make his rival rich. He had gathered the entire industry here to witness his own execution. I looked at Robert. I whispered into the microphone so only he and the front row could hear. I told him that was for the unpaid overtime. Then I dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a final, resounding thud. Flashbulbs exploded. The room erupted into chaos. Security guards rushed the stage, but not to arrest me. They were rushing to stop the reporters from mobbing Robert and Jessica. I turned around and walked down the stairs. I did not run. I did not look back. I walked through the parting crowd toward Marcus Vanguard, who was waiting with a glass of champagne and a contract. The double doors of the Palmer House Hilton swung shut behind me. The roar of the scandal was instantly muffled. I stepped out onto Monroe Street. The Chicago winter air hit my face like a block of ice. It felt wonderful. It felt like cleansing. A black limousine idled at the curb. The window rolled down. Marcus Vanguard sat in the back seat. He did not look like a shark. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. He opened the door. He invited me inside. The interior smelled of expensive leather and victory. Marcus handed me a thick envelope. His hands were steady. He told me that the performance inside was the most brutal corporate assassination he had ever witnessed. He meant it as a compliment. I opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check. It was written out for $250,000. This was just the signing bonus. The contract included a starting salary of $180,000 a year, plus full benefits and royalties on the design. My hands trembled. This piece of paper was not just money, it was freedom. It was medicine for my mother. It was the deed to our house. I looked at Marcus. I thanked him for believing in the Trojan horse. He smiled. He told me that talent was rare, but the courage to burn down a corrupt kingdom was even rarer. He ordered the driver to take me home. The fallout over the next 48 hours was swift and violent. I watched it unfold from the safety of my living room while nursing a cup of tea. The news cycle devoured the Sterling family alive. The video of Jessica in the elevator went viral within an hour. It trended #1 on Twitter globally. The internet did not forgive. They mocked her arrogance. They turned her into a meme. The hashtag #StolenSpire had over 5 million mentions by sunrise. However, the legal consequences were far worse than the social embarrassment. The Illinois Licensing Board announced an immediate investigation into Sterling Vance. They suspended Robert Sterling's architecture license pending a review of all his past projects. They suspected this was not the first time he had put his name on stolen work. Then came the financial collapse. Sterling Vance stock plummeted 60% in a single day of trading. Investors panicked. They saw the clip of me explaining the structural flaw. They realized that every building Robert had built might be a ticking time bomb. They sold their shares in a frenzy. By Wednesday afternoon, the board of directors at Sterling Vance held an emergency meeting. The news broke at 5 o'clock. Robert Sterling was voted out as CEO. He was removed from the company his grandfather built. Security escorted him out of the building with a box of his personal belongings. Jessica fared even worse. Vanguard's lawyers filed a criminal complaint for intellectual property theft and corporate espionage. She was not just fired. She was facing 3 to 5 years in federal prison. I saw a photo of her in the Chicago Tribune. She was leaving the police station in handcuffs. She looked small. She looked ordinary. The red dress was gone, replaced by a gray hoodie. I turned off the television. I had seen enough. I put on my coat. I grabbed the check from the kitchen table. I drove to the First National Bank on Halsted Street. This was the branch that had sent me the foreclosure notice 3 times a week for the last month. I walked to the desk of the loan officer. His name was Mr. Henderson. He was a man who enjoyed making people feel small. He had sneered at me last week when I asked for an extension. He looked up. He adjusted his glasses. He asked if I was finally here to hand over the keys to the house. I reached into my purse. I pulled out the check from Marcus Vanguard. I slammed it onto his mahogany desk. The sound echoed through the quiet bank. I told him to pay off the mortgage. I told him to pay off the interest. I told him to put the rest in a savings account for my mother's medical care. Mr. Henderson stared at the check. His eyes bulged. He looked at the amount. He looked at the signature of Marcus Vanguard. He looked at my polyester suit. He stammered. He asked where I got this money. I leaned in close. I smiled. I told him I designed a skyscraper. I walked out of the bank 10 minutes later. I held the paid-in-full receipt in my hand. It was just a piece of thermal paper. But it weighed more than the concrete of the foundations I poured. I drove home. The sun was setting over the skyline. I could see the cranes in the distance. Somewhere out there, construction crews were already preparing the site for the obsidian spire. My building. I pulled into the driveway. The house looked different. The peeling paint didn't look like poverty anymore. It looked like character. It looked like ours. I opened the front door. I smelled dinner cooking. My mother was sitting in her wheelchair by the window. She was watching the street, waiting for me. I walked over to her. I knelt down. I put the receipt in her trembling hands. She read it. She started to cry. I rested my head on her lap. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 2 years, the crushing weight on my chest was gone. We were safe. The war was over. 12 months passed since the gala. I stood on the 85th floor of the obsidian spire. The view from here was different. From this height, the city of Chicago looked like a circuit board of light and motion. I held a glass of sparkling water. I leaned my forehead against the cool, thick glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. Down below, on the street level, a crowd gathered for the grand opening. They were tiny dots moving on the pavement, but I did not need to be down there. I had already cut the ribbon. I had already shaken the hands. I preferred the silence up here. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from a legal news app. I pulled it out. The headline was simple. Jessica Sterling pleads guilty, sentenced to 3 years. I stared at the screen. I felt no joy. I felt no pity. I simply felt a sense of completion. It was like closing a heavy book that I never wanted to read again. Robert Sterling was currently working as a consultant for a small construction firm in Ohio. He had lost his license. He had lost his fortune in the lawsuits. The bank took his penthouse. The city took his reputation. They were gone. They were dust in the wind. I turned around. The penthouse was empty, waiting for its first tenant. The late afternoon sun flooded the space. It illuminated the steel columns that I had designed. I walked over to one of the massive beams. I ran my hand along the cold metal. People often asked me why I took such a risk that night. They asked why I did not just sue them quietly. They asked why I chose to burn it all down on live television. The answer was simple. They did not just steal a file, they tried to steal my existence. When Jessica took that flash drive, she was not just taking a drawing. She was taking the 18 hours a day I spent in the basement. She was taking the nights I missed dinner with my sick mother. She was taking the years of education I was still paying for. She thought she could erase me because I was quiet. She thought I was weak because I was poor. But she forgot the most important rule of architecture. A building is only as strong as its foundation, and my foundation was built on survival. I walked back to the window. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I saw the girl who used to wear polyester suits and count pennies for bus fare. She was still there, somewhere deep inside, but she was not afraid anymore. I learned that talent is not enough. Talent makes you a target. To survive in this world, you need more than just a good design. You need a fail-safe. You need the courage to protect what is yours, even if you have to destroy everything to do it. The elevator dinged behind me. Marcus Vanguard stepped out. He looked at me with a proud smile. He held a hard hat under his arm. He told me that the city council just approved our next project. It was a bridge connecting the north and south sides of the river. He asked if I was ready to start. I looked at him. I looked at the city below. I smiled. I told him to bring me the blueprints. I told him I had a few ideas. The obsidian spire stood tall against the Chicago wind. It did not sway. It did not break. It pierced the clouds like a black diamond. It was no longer just a building. It was a warning to anyone who thought they could steal from the shadows. I turned away from the window and walked toward the elevator. The work was done. The ghost in the basement was gone. I was the architect now.